We are Locked On Houston Astros, and we hope that you join us for a daily Locked On Astros podcast. My name is Eric Huysman. You can find me on Twitter at Eric Talks Stros. You can find the show at Locked On Astros, your team every day. Brett, where can they find you at?
They can find me at H-Town Wheelhouse on Twitter, and they can find me at Stros411 on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Always positive, always Stros.
And coming back to the show, I'm pretty sure you came on Locked On Astros before, is Ben Reiter. He is the guy behind the whole 2017 prediction, and I know you've moved past that. You've written Astro Ball, and you've got so much going on right now. So where can they find you on Twitter?
I'm at Ben Reiter, BenReiter. And Eric, it's nice to talk to you again. And Brett, it's nice to meet you in your first season with Locked On Astros.
Thank you.
Yeah, we're just talking before the show that last time we saw each other was it game? I think it was game 1 of the World Series, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think that's right.
Yeah,
a lot's happened since then.
yes, a lot has happened, and I guess I have to come out and say, did you know about this before it came out?
This being what?
Like the whole cash can scandal and everything.
I did not know about it. When the Athletic report dropped in November of last year, I was shocked. In some ways, I think I was probably more shocked than anybody because I had spent so much time, so much of my career, all the way back to that cover story you mentioned in 2014 through my book, and even after, writing about the Astros, explaining what made them tick, getting to know the various personalities in the organization. To have this come out was a blow, it hit me like a ton of bricks, really. But I immediately thought, Eric, well, how could this have happened? How does this fit into this broader story I've told about this organization's innovativeness and the visionary way in which it operated? And I felt a great personal responsibility to get to the bottom of it and to fit all the puzzle pieces together. And that's why I've spent the last 8 months of my life, basically this entire year of 2020, investigating this, reporting this, and making my narrative podcast, The Edge, which is out now, the 5th episode. It's Wednesday, October 28th today, so the 5th episode just dropped today.
Yeah, so I was going to ask you about that, being shocked, and I've listened to all 5 episodes, and anyone who's listening to this, if you haven't listened, after you get done listening to this episode of Locked On Astros, go check out The Edge, subscribe to it. It's phenomenally done. The production on it is top notch. I mean, everything from the music, everything you got, but the substance I love. I wanted to ask you this. Were you more shocked that when you found this out about the Astros because of the talent that the players they had and the persona they gave off, or was it a little bit of both? Because to us, they're the Astros. They're our guys. We don't see them as this cocky group. I know everybody else does, but was that what shocked you the most, was just the pure talent this team had and they still did this?
There are a lot of things about it that shocked me. I think the first thing was just how ridiculous it all was, right? Like, remember back to that day, I think it was November 12th, if I'm remembering correctly, 2019. I remember reading this story, like, trash can, like, I had told this story about this organization that was on the cutting edge, that was on the bleeding edge of everything. The trash can, right? Like, that's what they were doing. Like, that was almost the most shocking part initially. But then, yeah, as I thought more about it and my thoughts swirled, it was a lot about, there was something about, like, these guys were doing this, like, these guys who I thought I knew well, relatively. Obviously, as a reporter, you never know guys, so deeply. But I had a good idea of who these guys were. And then I thought, well, why did they do this, right? Like, I immediately believed the story was true because it was reputable reporters. It was only like a couple hours before all this video started coming out, as you guys will undoubtedly remember. But I wanted to know why did they do this? A team that was already, by any measure, a World Series caliber team, right? Like, a team that was running away with their division anyway. Like, why did they do this? And that kind of cultural question, as you know, Brett, is a big one that I've investigated so far in The Edge and that I'm going to continue to investigate.
Well, I believe the last time you're on the Locked On Astros podcast was the night that after Jose Altuve hit the Roldis Chapman, but I remember that we were talking, and then the report came out about Brandon Taubman, and you're talking about that it was one of your SI reporters who was reporting it, and you said no. If she's reporting this is legit. So that kind of goes back to the whole culture that you're talking about of the Astros front office, the Astros as a whole. But I know that the Astros of 2017, they used it in the postseason, in the playoffs. But do you think that they used it in the postseason? I think, Brett, you're telling me that Chase Utley was looking for stuff in the playoffs and he couldn't hear anything or see anything. So do you think that it was used in the playoffs or just during the regular season?
I think that's still a bit of an open question, and it is one in the final episodes of the podcast that I'm going to dive into more.
Ooh, the tease.
Yeah, I'm a natural at that. I don't think they were using the banging in the postseason. I don't. The episode today, I talked to Tony Adams, who a lot of Astros fans, especially hardcore fans, will know his name. He's the guy who did the study of all the trash cans of all the home games of the Astros in 2018 or 2017, at least 58 of the home games. And he couldn't find any bangs in the playoffs, right? In the commissioner's office, the report didn't indicate that the trash can banging was happening in the playoffs. I think that there were other attempts in the playoffs, probably, to do it. But I think the likelihood is those attempts weren't very successful if they were happening, especially in the World Series. Like, Brett, I did talk to Chase Utley in my podcast, and he said, yeah, I knew that they were up to something by watching video. And he almost tells this detective story in the World Series. Like, I'm looking at the bench, I'm looking in the outfield wall, I'm looking everywhere to see what they're doing. And he couldn't see anything. That doesn't mean they weren't doing anything. Maybe he just couldn't see it. But, they weren't banging. I don't think they were banging. Like, it's so loud in the playoffs. Tony Adams didn't pick up any banging. There's so many people around in the playoffs, like MLB officials, security, like media people all over the place. I tend to kind of take Carlos Correa at his word from back in spring training. And he didn't say they didn't try to bang, right? What he said, if you listen closely, is it would have been so hard, right? There was like they changed their sign so much in the World Series, the Dodgers, that we wouldn't have been able to do it. I think I'm taking that as the truth. I don't think that Carlos Correa, in combination with all the other factors I just mentioned, I don't think at that point that he is, going to lie like that to the national audience.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've tried to get across to other fan bases is, being from Houston, being here pretty much my whole life, since I was 2. I was actually born in Florida. We came out here during the whole economic boom in '77. So I've been an Astros fan my whole life. My first game was in the Astrodome. I was 2, and I don't even recall it. I just was told I was there when I was 2. And this city got hit really hard with Harvey. And, we come from a very blue collar mindset where we don't ever feel like anything should be given to us. Like, we don't have this elitist, like, we deserve this, right? The whole mantra that year, ironically, was earn history, right? And so to me, things like that kind of really shine brightly on the disparaging action that with the trash can, with the stealing the signs, because as a fan, you don't want your team to be the bad guys in that way. Like the Yankees are like the bad guys. They're like the quote unquote evil empire, right? But that's just kind of because they're the Yankees. But now we're like the bad guys because we're these horrible villains. So one of the analogies that Tony used on your website was he used it as like sign stealing, like robbery. And I kind of push back on that because I feel like unless we assign the term of robbery or stealing to all the clubs that have been caught doing this or have done this, because mechanical devices have been illegal to use in any way, shape, or form since 1961 in Major League Baseball. So I have a hard time scapegoating the Astros, and that's where I think a lot of fans are here in Houston. We know we got busted. We know and I say we know they got busted. We know that our team got caught, but we by far don't feel like we deserve the only scarlet letter on our chest. What would you say to Astros fans in that mindset?
I would say a few things. First of all, there is no doubt that the Astros are now viewed by 29 other teams at least and 29 other fan bases as the villains of Major League Baseball, right? Like we saw that. We saw that throughout the playoffs. The players started to accept it, right? Like Carlos Correa talking about the chip they had on their shoulder in the playoffs. I mean, that's what they're going to be. I think that the taint of this will always be with these players forever and will always be on that championship, right? I think you just kind of have to accept it. That's what happened on some level. To your other point, though, one of my goals in this podcast is not to absolve the Astros of anything, but to deeply contextualize the environment in which this was all happening. And I think you're right. I think that there was a significant degree of sign stealing using electronics across Major League Baseball. I don't know if it was 29 other teams that were doing this, but it was a lot, right? Doing this to some level. Now, that's mostly related to things like misusing the replay room or things. Like, I think my understanding is that the felony here, like the real robbery that set the Astros apart, was the trash can component, was the instantaneous delivery of pitches to batters at the plate, of signs, I should say, even in contexts in which teams didn't know to be defensive, right? Like teams are always defensive when there's a guy in second. Like they don't know to hide their signs usually when bases are empty. And I think if you see the reaction of other fan bases, I think interestingly, if you look at the genuine anger and rage from other players in the major leagues, especially in the spring, but all the way through the season, really, that does tell you that what the Astros did as far as the trash can scheme did go above and beyond even kind of the ethically murky norms of allowable sign stealing in the game. At least that's my view on it. Like I understand there are other views, but that's how I've kind of come to understand how what the Astros did fits into the larger picture of the ethics of the league at that point.
So I know that Jeff Luhnow recently came out. I'm sure you watched that interview, and I hear that you have an interview coming up. So what do you think about his story, and do you think that Alex Cora, Carlos Beltran, AJ Hinch, and Jeff Luhnow deserve another chance?
I'm trying to think how much I want to say about this because as you mentioned,
Right.
I teased it at the end of this podcast. I have an extensive interview with Jeff Luhnow in next week's episode 6. And I don't know how much I want to say about that right now. I will say that to me, I did watch his TV interview, which he did after I recorded my interview with him, but that's neither here nor there. He didn't say anything that I thought was not truthful, right? Like I didn't. To me, to my ears, there's nothing that I heard that my ears pricked up. I was like, wait a second, okay.
Right.
Like I guess as far as his knowledge of the scheme, either scheme, right? The trash can banging or the replay review scheme. Like the question of should he have known, right? Like could he have done more to know? Like was he responsible as the leader of the baseball operations department? In some ways, that's like a more interesting question to me, and one that, frankly, I dive into him pretty deeply, or dive into with him pretty deeply in next week's episode. And
So,
to your question of whether those guys have been punished, yes, I think that they've probably been punished sufficiently, right? Like a year suspension is a big deal. A big deal. Like Cora and Beltran lost their jobs as managers, right? Luhnow and Hinch lost their jobs. It's pretty rare for someone to be suspended from baseball for a year. And yeah, I mean, it's not for me to say, but I think that this punishment for those 4 is just.
And what I've learned at the end of the day is I'm not going to win any argument battles with anyone to try to convince them that, what the Astros did, everybody else was doing it, because it's not about whataboutisms. And I know at the end of the day, a lot of it has to do with the fact that they won. Now, had they lost, I think the narrative and the outcry and the outrage would be completely different had they not won. Now, another thing that was mentioned, you had Rob Arthur, who I thought was an interesting interview. This guy, kind of a statistical scientist. You have to remind me of his exact title, but he said that there was basically a single digit percent, I guess, chance that what they did actually helped them or aided them in winning the World Series. And it may be water under the bridge and here nor there. But do you think that the Astros won because they cheated? Or do you think, I mean, because you can't say solely, right? Because there's always multiple aspects that come into winning a title.
Right.
But do you think they won because of that, or do you think they won in spite of those things?
So the interview you're talking about is with Rob Arthur, who's a data
Yes.
scientist and
Okay.
journalist. That's on episode 5. He writes for Baseball Prospectus and a lot of other places like 538 and other statistical websites like that. And Rob studied, based off Tony Adams' data, actually, Rob studied the impact of the scheme. And in aggregate, on the whole, he found that the benefit was very small. And the reason for that is that about 9 out of 10 pitches that they banged on, they got it right. And they had a little bit of an improvement in their performance when they did. Not huge. It was like turning you from somebody who's okay into someone who's pretty good, right? But the 1 out of 10 pitches that they signaled wrong, right? Like when they banged the trash can before a fastball in particular, a bang suggesting that an off-speed pitch was coming, they had like no chance, right? Like they would turn into the worst hitters in the league. So those were so damaging that on the whole thing flattened out almost. This is Rob's finding. Now, he admits there's a few problems with this, in that we don't know like exactly what else they might have been doing in addition to banging, right? Like it's not a perfect data set, but you'd expect that on the whole, like any system would maybe have a similar result, right? Now, to get to your question about whether it was the reason they won the World Series, I think one of the tragedies of the whole thing is that we don't know, right? Like they were undeniably a World Series caliber team. But my podcast is called The Edge because baseball is a game of tiny edges. Some people say baseball is a game of inches, right? So could one pitch that they had to sign on illegally, could that have swung the World Series and the result? It was such a tight World Series, 7 games. We know how tight it was. Every game except for the last one was like neck and neck. Could that have made the difference? Maybe, maybe not, So I can't answer that question one way or the other, and nobody can. And that's one reason why people are so upset about this, right? Because it just wasn't, it doesn't seem like a fair result. And we'll never know what would have happened. Even if they weren't actually successfully doing anything in the World Series, there'll always be that doubt there.
So I know the Dodgers won the World Series yesterday. I still think that Kevin Cash should not have taken Blake Snell out, but he knows better than me, I guess, and I know it works most of the time. But the Dodgers finally won that World Series. It took them a few tries to get that done. One of those tries was versus the 2017 Astros, and we know that the Dodgers fans are probably leading the league in wanting to being the Astros. So do you think that the fact that they finally got their World Series, they can go riot and do whatever they want to do, and now they can get over the fact that the 2017 Astros cheat, or do you think that this is still going to be an issue next year?
Oh, I imagine it'll still be an issue, Eric.
Yeah, I know. I just want to get from a national person.
I mean, I don't, I guess I can predict some things, but I can't predict the behavior of a whole fan base really. But I will say that a lot of fans across the country were really looking forward this season to getting their chance to boo the Astros when they came to their park, right? To bring their fake trash cans to the stadium and bang on them and do whatever they're going to do. And I understand why they want to do that. but they didn't get that chance because there were no fans at the games, at least during the regular season. So I imagine a lot of that anger is still bottled up and will still come out when fans are actually back in the ballpark.
So you're saying you're not taking this Astrodamus thing to the next level? We won't see a Astrodamus and I don't know, maybe Brad Pitt as Ben Reiter in Astrodamus. Hey,
Brad Pitt's getting kind of old there.
I'll take Brad Pitt, Eric. I like that idea, Brad. Like, I'm not saying no to that, but I am generally out of the predictions game. I think.
I hear you.
In part because I might have predicted part of what was going to happen with the Astros, but I certainly did not predict all of it.
You predicted the main part.
Yeah, but I obviously can't see the future when it comes to everything.
I mean, you were almost like Marty McFly with the sports almanac. I mean, in real life. But hey, I wanted to ask you about this because this has kind of been talked about a little bit. And of course, I know I use the word Hall of Fame. A lot of these guys aren't even close to retirement, but Hall of Fame, Altuve, Hall of Fame, Bregman, Springer, Correa. Let's say they get to the end of their career. Let's say they have quote unquote Hall of Fame careers. They become guys that are on the ballot. Does 2017 loom no matter what they do over people voting for them, or is this too premature of a question?
I mean, it is a bit of a premature question, but that's okay. You can speculate. I think that, for some voters, they'll never forgive him. I think. But Jose Altuve how old is he now? Like 29 or something like that? He's not, I don't even think he's 30 yet. I'm not sure. We can look it up. But we're basically assuming that he has probably like 5 or 6 more all-star level years, at least much, much, much better years than he had this year. So if he puts together that kind of a career, and he gets to...
He's 30.
Okay, so he's 30 now, fine. And he gets 15 years from now, he's up for a vote for Cooperstown. Are there going to be voters who are going to be like, well, in 2017, for 5 months, your team banged on a trash can. And by the way, you, Jose Altuve, actually did not use this system, even though, to be fair, you did nothing as a leader to stop it, but you didn't use it yourself. That disqualifies you from being in the Hall of Fame, even though you're otherwise worthy? I would not say that. I think maybe other voters would say that. And I do have a vote now, I should say. That I had my first vote last year. And I will say, I'm someone who voted for Barry Bonds and Roger Clemens, who were great players, but, broke the rules, ethical rules at least, for much longer than the Astros did. So, yeah, I guess that's my answer to that.
So one of those players, I saw that I was reading an article somewhere, and they mentioned that George Springer could have a Hall of Fame career based on what he's done so far, and he's still young-ish. He's still 30-ish, and but he can still go on to have a Hall of Fame career. But do you think that will be with the Astros? I know that Jeff Luhnow is gone. I know you worked. I think you worked when you're in the front office. You're there under Jim Crane's ownership, right?
Well, I didn't work in the front office when I was spending my time with the team.
Yes.
Yeah, it was 2014 mostly.
Right.
So yes, that was during Crane's ownership.
So do you think that he's gonna? Do you think that they bring George Springer back, or is there too much of the market's probably gonna be too much for the Astros?
So first I'll say that I think that this winter's free agent market is going to be very, very bad for the players.
Slow too. Yes, slow.
Very slow. I think that ownership groups are crying poor. I think that they probably did not have a good financial season at all. They're doing a lot of layoffs in their front offices, in their business staffs, and their baseball operations staffs. I would be shocked if there's any truly huge contracts. Maybe 1 or 2. I have to look at the list. So I don't think that George Springer will be offered anything like what he might have expected to have been offered this winter before the pandemic hit. So I think that might increase the chance of a return to the Astros a little bit. But I have to tell you, if I was handicapping this, I don't think he's coming back. Like
Right.
I think we've seen the last of Springer as an Astro for a lot of reasons. Like they have a lot of people to pay. All those people who you're just talking about. Bregman already has a big contract. Verlander has another big year on his contract, although they may get insurance money for that because he's not going to pitch, right? But I don't know. They're going to pay Correa at some point. I just think I think it's very slim chance that Springer is going to come back to the Astros. But he's had a great career with them, a great run with them. He was the guy on the cover. You can't see it unless you're watching us on video, but the cover right there that I predicted, in which we said that the Astros would win the 2017 World Series, he was the cover boy. He was the World Series MVP. And, if I'm an Astros fan, if I were an Astros fan, I would, I just kind of hate when fans get angry at guys for leaving, like for taking the best deal that they can get. If you're a baseball player, it's so hard to get to that point in your career where you're actually going to make like a huge, like generational amount of money because your contract's controlled all the way through. That if I'm a baseball player, I'm going to take that wherever I can get it, and it's not an act of disloyalty or anything. It's not an act of being unappreciative of the fans or the team. It's just the reality of the business. So I would focus on everything that George Springer has done with the Astros if I was an Astros fan instead of being mad at him or something if he leaves.
Yeah, I really think that if he does leave, that George Springer's endeared himself enough. I think a lot of hardcore Astros fans or, um, the people that read all the articles and go to the Savant and the Baseball Reference and the Fan Graphs. And I mean, everybody knows George Springer was actually held back a year in the minors where he could have come up earlier. Had he done that last year, his free agent year would have been massive. But you had mentioned the SI cover, and I noticed in your bio on LinkedIn, I didn't stalk you or anything. It said that you have done 22 cover stories for Sports Illustrated. Now we know the topic du jour is the George Springer cover, but of the other 21 cover stories for SI that you've done, what was your favorite one that you've been a part of?
Man, did I say 20? I think it's actually 27. Not
Is it 27?
I think I might have mistyped on my own LinkedIn.
Oh, okay. Yeah, because I checked. It said 22.
Oh, all right. Well,
So
I guess maybe that was old.
You haven't updated it. That's all.
It could be. So I'll tell you.
Maybe.
I'll tell you two quick. One was the Where Are They Now issue of Sports Illustrated every summer, where we go back to usually old stories and check in on them. And I did one a few years ago on Ken Griffey Jr., where I went down to his house in Orlando and got to know the guy. And man, that one was really eye-opening because you think of Ken Griffey Jr. as this joyous guy, like the sweet swing, the smile, the backwards hat, all that. And he's just always has been a very different person than that image. Like I found a guy he's very introverted almost, right? Like he did this job like the most outward looking job in the world, performing in front of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of people on some nights. And he was just like an introvert who almost, for as much joy as he showed on the field, it was almost like painful for him at times. So anyway, that story was one that I always remember. And they also did a story that wasn't a cover story, but that was really meaningful to me about Hideki Irabu, the Yankees pitcher from Japan. It was also one of just digging under the surface of what people think about him. This buffoon almost, this failure, this guy who was so touted coming from Japan and ended up being best known by the phrase that George Steinbrenner applied to him, which was when he called him a fat, pussy toad, right? That's what people remember about Hideki Irabu. And if you read that story, there's just so much more to this guy than that. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's always a lesson. And it's something I try to do in the podcast too, is that there's always so many more depths and nuances to people than kind of like the one line public narrative about them. Yeah, and that's why I'm spending so much time digging into this Astro scandal as well.
All right. So looking at the fact the Astros won't have Justin Verlander next year, we don't know if he's coming back for 2022. Zach Greinke has, I believe, one more year left, and then you have a lot of free agents exiting this year. Carlos Correa could be a free agent after next year. Do you think the Astros window is closing to win another World Series, or do you think that with the right moves they can get back into it next year or in 2022?
Seems like it's going to be tougher going forward, not just because of those factors you mentioned, but just because there's a lot of really, really, really good teams, or a few in the American League that are going to stick together. The Rays aren't going anywhere, and the Yankees are always there. So yeah, it's going to be tougher. It's going to be tougher.
You have the White Sox as well. I mean, the White Sox are
the White Sox are
coming.
going to be there for a long time now, and the A's always somehow seem to make a run. So it's not just to list teams who are going to compete with them, but yeah, I mean that's one of the things. That's why the Astros were so fixated on being innovative, right, under Jeff Luhnow, is because these things are hard to maintain. If you're not constantly staying a step ahead of the competition, you're going to fall behind because players are going to leave or players are going to get way too expensive for you. So yeah, I think we're seeing that now. I think we're seeing, and some of these guys that kind of came out of nowhere to give them a real boost this year, it shows the depth and quality of the organization, right? I mean, a lot of these guys we saw pitching in the playoffs, as you know,
Right.
they're not on Baseball America's top 100 list. Like they're not even in Baseball America. Some of these guys, but the Astros picked them and developed them and helped them, and they saw talent in them that other teams maybe didn't see, and here they are pitching in the ALCS in Game 6 and Game 7 of the ALCS, some of them. So that'll be that might be an advantage for the Astros going forward if James Click can do the same thing with the help of the staff that he retains.
I'll tell you something interesting I saw today about the Dodgers real quick, because I know we're winding up on time. All the Dodgers pitchers that pitched I believe in the postseason or the World Series have been with the Dodgers their entire career. Someone had said, and I didn't realize that. I was going to look into it, but I was like, wow, that's actually pretty impressive. If that's true, that's impressive.
That is.
Well, there's a lot of young pitchers with them too. So you got
Exactly.
Dustin May, then you have that guy who got yanked early yesterday. I can never remember his name.
Gonsolin.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, Gosselin. And so, but speaking of which, I know that Zach Greinke kind of came out and said that it was nice that Dusty Baker left him in that game. He said that it's nice to feel trusted. I know we saw Blake Snell get pulled yesterday. He wasn't too happy about that. So what is your philosophy real quick on the whole not letting the batters see the pitcher a third time?
I get the debate, especially related to Snell, right? Track record suggested it wasn't a good idea to leave him in. The all the analytics you have based on everything that he'd done this season suggested that he wouldn't be as effective in this third time through the order. But like sometimes the playoffs are different, right? Like first of all, I think that move would have probably worked like most of the time, which is what you make your moves based on if you're thinking analytically and not emotionally. But maybe it's a skill to recognize that things are different right now. And that this dude is throwing like the game of his life. Right. His velocity is still at 95 or 96. They can't touch him. So maybe all that stuff that happened in the regular season isn't apply as much right now. And maybe all the dominating performances that Nick Anderson turned in during the regular season don't apply right now either, because they certainly didn't seem to over the previous like 6 outings in the playoffs. So yeah, there always will be, I think, room for the human factor in this game. No matter how far analytics go, at the end of the day, maybe the human factor will be the separator, right? Like maybe that's going to be the difference maker. But I don't think it was the wrong move, textbook by Cash.
Right.
But it's certainly questionable.
Yeah, so I know, Brett, I kind of want to bring this up is the whole Justin Turner situation. I meant to talk about this earlier, but the fact that he tested positive and he went onto the field, Do you think that this is going to be a big deal at like after they do their investigation? Because they told him to quarantine, and he kind of went out there anyway. And I think Mookie Betts said, "Oh, it's okay. He's part of the team, or he deserves this, or something."
I don't know if there's gonna be much of an investigation on this one because I think they know exactly what happened,
Right.
and I don't think it was. I don't think it was right. I mean, he should not have done that. You know, this whole season was based on this whole season they were walking this tightrope and like keeping everybody's safety and health in a top of mind supposedly, and for this to happen at the end of it, I don't know. The commissioner or the league office already came out with some pretty harsh words for Turner, and I don't think there's going to be an investigation. I do think there'll probably be some repercussions.
All right, Brad, you got a final question?
No, I was just gonna mention about, this whole, postseason and everything. The Rays, only had one run, and I know everybody's hanging this on Cash, but the Rays had 6 players hit under 200 in the postseason. You can't do much. I mean, the Astros had an anemic offense in '05 when we went to the World Series, and we saw what happened against an also an anemic offense against the White Sox. They just had to, do a little bit more. So I think the Rays losing is more of a team loss than a Cash loss.
Yeah, I think you're right. Guys, I want to thank you so much for having me on, and thanks so much for listening to The Edge and letting me talk about it. It's really been a passion project for the last 8 months, and I can't wait for all your listeners to hear it.
And I love the fact that you have Astro Ball back there, proudly displayed. So perfect.
Oh, do I? Oh.
So Ben, maybe towards the closer to spring training, we can kind of talk about the get together again and kind of talk about some of the moves that were made. But I really appreciate this, and always as you taking time. And guys, go check out his podcast. Where can you listen to it? Anywhere you listen to podcasts. So The Edge. And so, any final thoughts, Ben?
That's it, guys. Nice to talk to you again, and thanks for having me on.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Ben.